Welcome back to Sarah History. Today we're going to talk about a man who gave the modern world its electricity, its radio, its wireless technology, its alternating current, the very power running through the walls of whatever room you are sitting in right now, and who died alone, broke, in a hotel room, with his greatest dreams dismissed as the fantasies of a madman. We are talking about Nikola Tesla. And I want to say something clearly at the start. Tesla's story is not simply the story of a misunderstood genius robbed of credit. It is more complicated than that. It is the story of a man of almost supernatural intellectual gifts who was also deeply impractical, who made catastrophic decisions, who was outmaneuvered by people with less brilliance but more cunning, who let obsession consume him, and who ultimately could not survive the collision between his vision of what the world should be and the reality of how the world actually works. It is a story about the gap between genius and success, about the difference between inventing the future and profiting from it, about what it costs a human being to carry a mind like his. And it is one of the great human stories that history has produced. Let us begin in a thunderstorm. Part 1. The Child of Lightning. Nikola Tesla was born on the 10th of July, 1856, at the stroke of midnight, during a violent lightning storm, in a small village called Smiljan in what is now Croatia, then part of the Austrian Empire. His mother, standing at the window watching the lightning, is said to have turned to the midwife and said, "This child will be a child of the storm." The midwife replied, "No, a child of light." That story may be polished by time, but it is the right story for the right man. His father was a Serbian Orthodox priest, a brilliant literary man who had memorized vast quantities of poetry and could recite entire books from memory. His mother was illiterate but possessed what Tesla would later describe as the most remarkable memory he had ever encountered in a human being. She invented and built her own household tools and appliances. She could memorize long epic poems after a single reading. She worked from before dawn until late at night. Tesla would say for the rest of his life that everything he was, he owed to his mother. He was a strange child in the way that certain kinds of genius is strange. He experienced vivid, involuntary mental imagery, hallucinations, essentially, though not of the frightening kind. Images would flash before his eyes, sometimes so vivid he could not distinguish them from reality. He eventually learned to use this. He could visualize a machine in complete, working three-dimensional detail inside his mind, run it mentally, identify where it would fail, correct the design, run it again, all before picking up a tool or drawing a single line. He called it his method of invention. He never needed physical prototypes the way other engineers did. The prototype existed, complete and functional, inside his head. As a boy he devoured books. He taught himself multiple languages. He had a particular obsession with understanding natural phenomena, storms, light, electricity, the invisible forces he felt moving through the world. He was also prone to nervous collapse, to strange compulsions, to behaviors that modern medicine would likely classify. He had an intense aversion to jewelry, particularly pearl earrings. He could not bear to touch hair. He counted his steps obsessively. He calculated the volume of his food before eating it. He needed his hotel room number to be divisible by 3. These were not affectations. They were the particular texture of a mind that was wired differently than other minds, in ways that were simultaneously his greatest gift and his heaviest burden. He went to the Technical University in Graz, Austria, and then to Charles Ferdinand University in Prague. He was a brilliant student. He worked obsessively, often 18 to 20 hours a day, to the point where his professors wrote to his father that if something was not done, the young man would work himself to death before he graduated. He didn't graduate. He suffered a complete nervous breakdown, disappeared for several months, and eventually recovered, changed, somehow steadier, or perhaps just more focused on what he already knew he had to do. In 1882, while walking through a park in Budapest, watching the sunset, reciting poetry from Goethe's Faust, an idea struck him with the force of physical impact. He stopped. He grabbed the arm of the friend walking with him and began drawing in the dirt with a stick. He was describing, for the first time, the principle of the rotating magnetic field, the foundation of alternating current electrical systems, the principle on which virtually all electrical power generation and transmission in the world still operates today. He had been wrestling with a problem that the greatest electrical engineers of his era believed was unsolvable. He solved it in a park, while reciting poetry. Part 2. The New World and the War of Currents. In 1884, Tesla arrived in New York City. He was 28 years old. He had 4 cents in his pocket, a letter of recommendation, and a head full of ideas that would change the world. The letter of recommendation was to Thomas Edison. Edison was, at that point, the most famous inventor in the world. His laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, was a wonder of the age. He had invented the phonograph. He had developed a practical incandescent light bulb. He had built the first electrical power system in the world, a direct current system powering Lower Manhattan from a generating station on Pearl Street. He was celebrated, wealthy, and ferociously protective of his inventions and his market position. Tesla went to work for Edison. And for a brief period, it seemed like it might work. Tesla was a brilliant engineer. Edison recognized the talent. But the two men were opposites in almost every way. Edison worked by brute force trial and error. He famously said that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, and he meant it literally, running thousands of experiments until something worked. Tesla found this approach almost physically painful. He would look at Edison's methods and see the immense inefficiency of it, the waste of human energy and time, when the solution was there to be reasoned out, visualized, understood without the need for 10,000 failed attempts. There was also a specific technical disagreement that would define the rest of both their lives. Edison's electrical system ran on direct current, DC. The current flows in one direction, steadily, like water through a pipe. It works. But it has a fatal limitation. It cannot be transmitted over long distances. Every mile or so you need another generating station. To power a city with DC, you need dozens of power plants spread throughout that city. This was what Edison had built, and it was enormously expensive and limited in its scalability. Tesla's alternating current system, the one he had conceived in the park in Budapest, solved this problem completely. AC current changes direction many times per second and can be transformed to very high voltages for transmission, then stepped back down for use. This means one generating station can power an entire city or an entire region through transmission lines. It is more efficient, more practical, and infinitely more scalable than DC. Edison understood this immediately, and he refused to accept it. Not because he failed to grasp the engineering, because he had already invested millions of dollars and his entire personal reputation in DC. Admitting that AC was superior would cost him everything he had built. So Edison did something that has made him a villain in this particular story ever since. He launched a public campaign against alternating current. He argued it was dangerous. True, in a sense, as high-voltage AC is more dangerous than low-voltage DC, and to demonstrate this, he and his associates began publicly electrocuting animals using Tesla's alternating current. Dogs, calves, and eventually, in the most grotesque demonstration, they electrocuted an elephant named Topsy at Coney Island. In front of a crowd. They filmed it. This was the war of currents. And it was brutal. But the truth has its own momentum. Tesla had left Edison's employ after a dispute over payment. Edison had reportedly promised him $50,000 to improve his DC motor designs. Tesla did it. When he asked for the payment, Edison laughed and told him he didn't understand American humor. Tesla resigned immediately. He was not a man who tolerated being treated as less than what he was. He soon found a more suitable partner. George Westinghouse, founder of Westinghouse Electric, was a visionary industrialist who immediately understood what Tesla's AC system meant for the future of electrical power. He licensed Tesla's patents, paid him generously, and went to war with Edison's General Electric Company for the right to power America. The decisive battle was the World's Columbian Exposition, the Great World's Fair held in Chicago in 1893. Both Westinghouse and General Electric bid to light the entire fairground. Westinghouse won on price, using Tesla's AC technology. Tesla himself demonstrated his system at the fair, including experiments with wireless lighting, holding fluorescent tubes in his hands and lighting them without wires, from the electrical field his equipment generated, that left audiences gasping and convinced that they were watching a man who had made a deal with something beyond ordinary human knowledge. Then came Niagara Falls. The contract to harness the power of Niagara Falls and transmit electrical power to the city of Buffalo, New York, a distance of 25 miles, was awarded to Westinghouse. Tesla designed the generators. On November 16, 1896, the switch was thrown. Power from Niagara Falls lit the city of Buffalo. It was the first long-distance electrical transmission in history. Edison's DC system could not have done it. The war of currents was over. Alternating current won. The entire world is powered by Tesla's system to this day. And Tesla himself, at that moment of triumph, was already moving on. Because the thing about Tesla is that he was never really interested in winning arguments. He was interested in the next idea. And the next idea was something so far ahead of his time that the world would not be ready for it for another century. Part 3. The Wizard of Wardenclyffe. Tesla became famous in the 1890s. Genuinely, enormously famous. He had a laboratory in New York where he performed electrical demonstrations that bordered on theater. He created artificial lightning bolts. He lit wireless lights. He demonstrated early radio transmission. He built devices that produced electrical effects so dramatic that they seemed impossible. The newspapers called him the Wizard. Mark Twain was a personal friend and spent time in his laboratory. Celebrities came to watch him work. He was photographed, written about, interviewed. He gave lectures that packed auditoriums. He was also laying the groundwork for what he believed would be his greatest achievement. Tesla was convinced, based on real physics, not fantasy, that the Earth itself could be used as an electrical conductor. That by sending electrical energy into the Earth and into the ionosphere, a system of resonating electrical energy could be created that would allow the wireless transmission of both power and communication signals anywhere on Earth. Anyone, anywhere, could access this energy. It would be free. It would be universal. It would end the poverty created by lack of access to power. This was not madness. The physics underlying it is real. The Earth does have electrical properties that Tesla understood. The ionosphere is a conductor. The principle of wireless energy transmission is not fantasy. We use variations of it today in wireless charging pads and in experimental long-range energy transmission projects. Tesla was a century ahead of the technology needed to implement his vision at scale. But the vision itself was not wrong. To build it, he needed money. He found the most powerful financier in America, J.P. Morgan. Morgan gave him $150,000, an enormous sum, and construction began at Wardenclyffe on Long Island. Tesla designed a tower, the Wardenclyffe Tower, that would be the transmitting station for his world wireless system. It rose nearly 60 meters. It had a dome at the top and roots that went 30 meters into the earth. And then Morgan asked a question that Tesla could not answer in a way that Morgan would accept. Morgan asked how customers would be metered. How would anyone pay for the energy if it was broadcast freely through the earth? How would there be a profit? There would not be. That was Tesla's answer. That was his vision. Free energy for everyone. Morgan withdrew his funding. Construction stopped. Tesla poured his own money into the project, then borrowed money, then ran out of everything. The Wardenclyffe Tower stood unfinished for years. In 1917 it was demolished, sold for scrap to pay Tesla's debts. Tesla watched it come down. He had a breakdown. He was hospitalized briefly. And though he lived for another 26 years, something in him did not fully recover from the destruction of Wardenclyffe. Part 4. The Slow Disappearance. The years after Wardenclyffe were a long, painful unraveling. Tesla continued to work. He always continued to work. The ideas never stopped coming. He held over 300 patents in his lifetime across multiple countries. He developed early concepts for radar, which the military would develop during World War II. He described principles that underlie the modern turbine. He worked on early ideas for what might be called particle beam weapons. He claimed, in his later years, to have invented a death ray, a directed energy weapon capable of destroying entire armies from a distance, which the military of multiple nations investigated and dismissed. The death ray was probably real in concept, and utterly impractical with the technology of his time, but his ability to attract funding was gone. His reputation had shifted. The man who had been the wizard became, in the public imagination, something slightly embarrassing, the eccentric genius who lived in hotels and talked about free energy and made grand claims that never seemed to materialize. The patents that should have made him wealthy had been signed away or expired or were simply not enforced. He had, early in his career, done something almost incomprehensibly generous. He had torn up his royalty agreement with Westinghouse when Westinghouse told him the company was in financial trouble and the royalty payments might bankrupt it. Tesla tore up the contract, walked away from what would have been millions and millions of dollars. Because he liked Westinghouse and because the money mattered less to him than the work. He never stopped being that kind of man. And that kind of man, in the world as it actually operates, tends not to die wealthy. He moved into the Hotel New Yorker in 1933. He was 77 years old. He lived in room 3327, the room number, as always, divisible by 3. He ate alone. His meals became increasingly sparse and strange. He had developed strong views about diet and ate almost nothing but warm milk and honey in his final years. He fed the pigeons of Bryant Park every day, having developed an intense, tender attachment to them that he did not try to explain and did not feel required explanation. He had one particular white pigeon that he described in terms of love, saying that when that pigeon was healthy and looked at him, he felt warmth and meaning that nothing else in his life provided at that point. The white pigeon died in the winter of 1943. Tesla wept. Not long after, his own health collapsed completely. On the 7th of January, 1943, a hotel maid knocked on the door of room 3327 and received no answer. She entered. Tesla was dead in his bed. He was 86 years old. He had died alone. The cause of death was listed as coronary thrombosis. He had no family in the room. No colleagues at his bedside. No ceremony. Just a man who had lit the world, alone in a hotel, finally resting. Part 5. The Theft and the Reckoning. What happened next to his legacy tells you something important about how the world treats its geniuses. Within hours of Tesla's death, the Office of Alien Property, an American government agency, seized all of his papers, his notebooks, his correspondence, and his equipment from his room and his storage unit. Tesla was a naturalized American citizen, but the agency acted anyway. The official reason was the ongoing World War and concerns that his research, particularly anything relating to directed energy weapons, might fall into enemy hands. The papers were eventually reviewed by government scientists and returned to Tesla's nephew, Sava Kasanovic, who donated them to the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade, Serbia, where many remain today. Some of those papers have never been fully declassified or released to the public. What exactly was in them that required decades of government attention remains a matter of historical debate. Meanwhile, the question of credit had been contested for years. Guglielmo Marconi had received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1909 for the invention of radio. Tesla disputed this his entire life, pointing out that Marconi's radio system used 17 of Tesla's patents. In 1943, the same year Tesla died, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Marconi's key radio patents were invalid because Tesla's prior work predated them. Tesla had legally been the inventor of radio for 80 years. But the Nobel goes to Marconi in the history books, and Marconi is who most people think of when they think of radio. Thomas Edison won the war of public perception, despite losing the war of currents. Edison appears in every list of the greatest inventors in history. He has monuments, museums, a town in New Jersey named after him. Tesla has a car company named after him by a man who admires his legacy but did not know him. And an SI unit of magnetic flux density, the Tesla, named in his honor in 1960, 17 years after his death. The reckoning has been coming slowly. The Internet discovered Tesla. The popular rehabilitation of his legacy over the last 30 years has been significant, perhaps somewhat overcorrected, turning him into a kind of patron saint of misunderstood genius, which flattens the complexity of who he actually was. He was not simply a hero robbed by villains. He made real mistakes. He was difficult. He was impractical. He had genuine limitations alongside his extraordinary gifts. He was human. But he was also, without serious question, one of the most remarkable minds in the history of human civilization. Part 6. What he actually built. Let me be specific, because Tesla's actual achievements deserve to be named clearly without myth and without undersell. He invented the alternating current motor and the polyphase electrical system. Every electrical motor in every factory, every home appliance, every air conditioning unit, every electric vehicle, every industrial machine in the world that runs on AC power, runs on a principle Tesla invented while watching a sunset and drawing in the dirt. He developed the Tesla coil, a resonant transformer circuit that produces high-voltage, high-frequency electricity. It is still used in radio and television transmission equipment. It is the foundation of modern wireless communication technology. He performed the first demonstrations of radio transmission and holds the foundational patents for radio technology, as confirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Every radio, every Wi-Fi signal, every Bluetooth connection, every cellular network in the world operates on principles he first demonstrated. He designed the generators at Niagara Falls and the transmission system that first proved long-distance electrical power delivery was possible. Every power grid on Earth is built on that proof. He developed early concepts for radar, for fluorescent lighting, for the speedometer, for the induction motor. He held patents in fields ranging from mechanical engineering to electrical engineering to early wireless technology. And Wardenclyffe, the dream that destroyed him, was a vision of global wireless power that we are still working toward. Experiments in wireless power transmission at distance are active research areas today. Tesla's intuition about the electrical properties of the Earth and atmosphere was not wrong. It was simply a century ahead of what the technology could support. He built the 20th century. He just didn't get to live comfortably in it. Part 7. The Human Weight of a Mind Like His. I want to stay here, because this is the part of Tesla's story that I think matters most and gets discussed least. What does it actually feel like to be a person with a mind that operates the way his did? He described his visual hallucinations beginning in childhood as frightening and disorienting until he learned to control them. He described the compulsions and the counting and the aversions as things he fought against for most of his life. He described the loneliness, and he was deeply, profoundly lonely. He never married. He said he deliberately chose to devote himself entirely to his work and had no room for personal attachment. But his letters and his accounts of that white pigeon suggest something more complicated than a deliberate choice. Suggest a man who found the ordinary architecture of human connection genuinely difficult, for reasons rooted in who he was. He slept very little. 3 to 4 hours a night was his habit, sometimes less. He worked in bursts of sustained intensity that lasted days. He had a number of complete nervous breakdowns over the course of his life. He recovered from all of them, but each one cost him something. And he carried his visions the way other men carry tools. He could not put them down. He did not have the option of clocking out of being Nikola Tesla. The ideas came whether he was ready for them or not. The rotating magnetic field came while he was reciting poetry in a park. Ideas came in dreams, in the moments between sleep and waking, in the middle of conversations. He was always, simultaneously, somewhere else, in the machine, in the circuit, in the flow of invisible forces that he felt around him like a second world layered over the ordinary one. That is an extraordinary gift. It is also an extraordinary weight. And by the end of his life, the weight was all that was left visible. The world had moved on. The men who had the practical cunning to commercialize what he invented, Edison, Marconi, others, had their monuments built. Tesla was in a hotel room with pigeons. He reportedly said, near the end of his life, that he did not regret what he had given the world. That the ability to transform an idea into reality was the greatest gift a person could be given. That he had been given it, and he had used it. I believe him. And I think it is one of the more heartbreaking things I have encountered in the study of history. Closing. Nikola Tesla died with nothing. No money. No family at his side. No acknowledgement from the institutions of his time proportional to what he had given them. The world was lit by his ideas, and he died in the dark, in a sense, though probably not in the sense that troubled him. Because the darkness that troubled Tesla was never poverty or obscurity. It was the distance between the world as it was and the world as he could see it should be. A world where energy was free and universal. Where the invisible forces of the earth and sky were harnessed not for profit, but for the liberation of every human being from scarcity. He did not get to build that world. The forces of commerce and practicality and human limitation that he was never very good at navigating prevented it. And one could argue that his vision was genuinely impractical, that the physics that made his global wireless power idea theoretically plausible also made it practically impossible to implement at the scale he imagined, with the technology of any era including our own. But I keep thinking about that boy in Smiljan, during the lightning storm, clutching visions he had no words for yet. Watching his mother work by lamplight, building tools with her hands, her mind moving through problems in ways that others around her could not follow. feeling the electricity in the air as something speaking to him, as something with a language he was born already half knowing. He spent his entire life trying to translate that language for the rest of us. And the lights are on. Whatever else you want to say about how his story ended, the lights are on. The motors turn. The signals travel through the air without wires. The power moves from where it is generated to where it is needed, over distances that Edison said were impossible. He was right. The world proved it, whether it wanted to credit him or not. This has been Sarah History, Episode 5. Thank you for being here.